Into the unknown. I thought I knew the forest. The way the trees swayed with the wind, the sound of the leaves scraping against each other in the stillness. But tonight, everything was different. The darkness felt heavier, like it had a mind of its own, watching, waiting. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath, tightening my grip. It didn't matter. I had to keep moving. I had been hiking with a group of friends earlier that day. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, a quick break from our chaotic lives. But something went wrong. Someone was missing. My closest friend, Ian. One moment he was laughing, the next, he was gone. We all searched for hours, but the more we called out, the more the forest swallowed our voices. I couldn't leave. I see OULDN single quotes. Now, walking through the trees alone, the air felt dense. It wasn't just the cold creeping under my skin, or the rustling of the branches. It was something deeper, something gnawing at me, pushing me forward when I wanted to turn back. The shadows in the woods seemed to shift, and I swore I saw eyes watching from the darkness. And then, I heard it. A whisper. It was faint at first, so soft that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. But it was there, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Like a voice calling my name, not mine. Eons. The whisper repeated, growing louder. I froze. The forest seemed to hold its breath. My heart raced. The path ahead was blocked by a dense thicket, but there was something through it, something that pulled me closer. A house. An old, crumbling building I had never seen before. How had I missed it? The air around it was different, like it existed outside of time. Everything seemed to pause. I felt like I had stepped into a place where the rules of the world didn't apply. The door creaked open by itself. I didn't question. IT couldn't. Something told me this was the answer. I stepped inside, and the temperature dropped. My breath fogged in front of me, the darkness swallowing everything. The room was filled with dust and forgotten relics. Furniture, old and battered, lay scattered around the room. There was no sign of life. But then, there was movement. A figure in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. I blinked, and it was gone. My stomach twisted. "Hello?" I called, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the space-silence. I turned to leave, but my foot caught on something, a small, dusty book. When I bent down to pick it up, I saw a note tucked inside. It was written in a hurried, uneven hand, the ink smudged. "Get out. Don't stay. They won't let you leave." I didn't know what to think. Panic clawed at my chest. I needed to go, but the door wouldn't open. It was like the house itself was holding me in, keeping me from leaving. I tried again, harder this time. Nothing. That's when I heard a soft sound of footsteps behind me. Slowly, deliberately, I spun around, heart pounding, and there he was. Ian. But not the Ian I remembered. His eyes were hollow, like he was a ghost, a shell of the person I once knew. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his mouth barely moved. As he spoke, "You should have left when you had the chance." Before I could react, he vanished. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on me. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't explain. I stumbled backward, falling onto a chair that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Every time I thought I understood what was happening, everything changed. I looked around desperately. There was a window, but when I rushed to it, all I saw was more of the same endless blackness. I couldn't see anything outside. I was trapped. The whispers came again, but they weren't from Ian anymore. They were different, faint, like voices from another time, another world. They circled around me, getting closer, pressing in on my thoughts, my fears. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The fear inside me turned to cold, heavy dread. The house was alive. It knew me. It knew my fears, and it was never going to let me leave. Every corner of the room held a shadow. Every creak of the floor seemed to echo with a past I couldn't escape. It was as if I had been pulled into a place where time didn't exist, a place where the rules of reality were bent and twisted. I tried to remember how I got here, but my mind wouldn't cooperate, and then I understood. The house wasn't just trapping MIT, was changing me. It was erasing who I was, bit by bit, until I was just another forgotten soul, lost in its walls. I glanced at the door again, but this time, it wasn't there. The walls were closing in, pushing me into a small, tight space. The whispers grew louder, filling my head, and then everything went dark. The return of the night. The forest was shrouded in the darkness of night, wrapping everything in a heavy cloak of solitude. A cold wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves with a ghostly murmur. Rachel clutched her small flashlight tightly, the only source of light in the suffocating blackness. With each step, her feet sank into the damp earth, the strange scent of the soil filling her nose. She felt something was wrong, but she couldn't quite understand what. A few days ago, she had set out on an exploration deep into the woods with a group of friends. But when one of them disappeared, panic took over, scattering everyone in different directions. Yet, she refused to leave. She had to find the missing friend. The deeper she ventured, the more time seemed to lose its meaning, as if it, too, had been swallowed by the forest. After a while, her eyes caught movement between the trees. She spun around quickly. Nothing. A chill from the wind brushed against her skin, making her shudder. She took a deep breath, but she knew something was missing. Then, she heard it. A whisper, trembling and faint, barely audible. And then, from somewhere far away, a scream. But it was neither human nor animal. She quickened her steps. There was only one path left to take, leading to the abandoned apartment, the one that had stood there for as long as anyone could remember, yet belonged to no one. No one knew how long it had existed, or who had lived in it. But she knew she had to go there. She felt her friend was inside, that the voices were calling from within. This place, she thought, was a threshold between worlds. As she stepped into the apartment, hesitation gripped her. The door creaked open, heavy with time and silence. The weight of the place settled on her shoulders. Yet, the further she stepped inside, the more she felt drawn in, as if something unseen was pulling her forward. The air inside was as thick and strange as the forest outside. The room was cluttered, filled with forgotten remnants of lives long past. The old crumbling walls, the dust-covered furniture, they all seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't understand. And then, suddenly, he appeared. A man stood in the middle of the room. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped toward her, his gaze locked onto hers. His eyes deep, hollow voids sent a cold shiver down her spine. "Come here," he said. His voice echoed unnaturally, stretching and distorting in the stillness. Rachel's fear and curiosity tangled together in her mind, and then he vanished. He dissolved into the darkness, fading into nothing, like a shadow retreating into the walls. Rachel's breath hitched as realization dawned on her. This was the missing person. But now, he was something else. Something changed. She turned to run, but the sounds of the forest had disappeared. The silence was overwhelming, suffocating. Fear was no longer creeping at the edges of her thoughts. It had settled into the room, filling every corner with an eerie stillness. She was no longer in the depths of the forest. She was trapped within these four walls. There was only one window, but it led to nowhere. No matter how many times she tried to leave, the hallway always brought her back. The same door, the same room, the same suffocating emptiness. The lines of reality blurred, echoes of the past, whispers of the lost, and the murmurs of the forest all converged here. Each time she thought she had figured something out, another mystery took its place. But there was no solution, only this endless maze. And then, she understood. There was no escape, no way out. She was now one of the lost, Another spirit, abandoned in the forest, now bound to this place. This apartment was a dead end, a trap, and each step only led her deeper into it. The same fear she had felt in the forest now pulsed in the walls, in the air, in every forgotten object surrounding her, and now, every time she closed her eyes, she found herself screaming. But this time, the scream was so deep, so vast, that understanding where she was, what she had become, was impossible. The Dark Circle. The entire town grew up with the stories of the abandoned village deep in the forest. No one could stay there for long. Anyone who ventured into the village would either disappear or return with such an empty, horrifying look in their eyes that no one dared approach them. A group of young people gathered the courage to debunk these old legends. The boldest among them was Jake, always seeking attention in the crowd. One evening, standing in the town square, he declared, "The legend is just a story. We'll spend a night in the forest and come back. No one's getting lost." Under Jake's leadership, the group set off into the dark forest late at night. The trees grew so closely together that even the thinnest beam of light couldn't penetrate to the ground. Only the faint glow of the moon filtered weakly through the branches. With each step, leaves rustled beneath their feet, and occasionally, the wind carried eerie whispers that sent chills down their spines. After walking for a while, the silhouette of an abandoned house emerged in the depths of the forest. But this house was unlike any other deserted place. Its windows were wide open, revealing its hollow interior, and the door seemed almost existent. Jake pointed ahead. "This is it," he said. "This is where it all began." The house was truly strange. Faded writings covered the walls, some in Latin, others in cryptic symbols that no one could decipher. But the most unsettling thing was a perfectly round circle in the center of the floor. The lines were so clear, so precise, as if they had been drawn not 100 years ago, but just an hour earlier. They looked around, but there was nothing unusual. As the night deepened, the group found themselves gathered around the circle when they suddenly heard a sound. At first, it was faint, then it grew louder, a laughter. But this was no ordinary laughter. It wasn't human. It was the laughter of something rotted and broken. Panic gripped them. They tried to step back, but their feet felt glued to the floor. Then, all at once, a wave of freezing air burst through the room, and from within the circle, something unseen began to rise. A shadowy figure, barely distinguishable in the pitch-black darkness, was watching them. Fear overtook them. They turned to run, but it was as if they were trapped in a nightmare. Their bodies moved, yet they remained in the same spot. For a moment, silence fell. Then, Jake took a step forward into the circle. A voice echoed, "If you take one more step, no matter how far you run, you will never leave. This place will be your home now." Suddenly, everything shifted. The ground warped, the walls vanished, and a blinding white light swallowed the room. They collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The circle was no longer just a marking. It had become a trap beyond time and space. Then, Jake's voice rang out, "Listen to me. To escape, we must." A blood-curdling scream cut him off. Jake's eyes went hollow, just like those who had disappeared before. But this time, Jake wasn't there anymore. Only his eyes remained, staring into nothingness, locked forever in the dark corners of the house. And worst of all, Jake's voice echoed back through the emptiness, "You will all stay here, forever." The group awoke suddenly. The circle was gone. Behind them, there was nothing, only an empty forest. But in their eyes, in the depths of their souls, the terror remained. Nothing was truly gone. Deep within the forest, the circle still existed, waiting. If someone ever dared to return and look again, perhaps the circle would be waiting for them.